The wheels of Japan Airlines Flight 007 kissed the runway at Haneda at 11:43 in the evening, local time, and Jack Bauwer did not look up from the window. He had been watching the lights of Tokyo Bay for the last 20 minutes of descent, a scattered constellation pressed flat against black water, and something about the sight made him feel the full weight of the flight, the full weight of everything that had come before it. He was traveling as Daniel Cross, Canadian passport, clean legend, a consulting firm in Vancouver that existed on paper and nowhere else. The photograph was close enough. The name sat wrong in his mouth the way all cover names did, like a stone you had to carry on your tongue. He had done this before. He would do it again. He told himself that. The terminal at Haneda was cool and bright and ruthlessly efficient. Even at this hour it moved with purpose. Ground crew on the tarmac, cleaning staff pushing carts through the corridors, a handful of late-arriving passengers rolling luggage toward the immigration desks, with the hollow-eyed patience of people who had stopped counting time zones. Jack moved with them, not too fast, not too slow. He kept his carry-on over one shoulder and his hands where anyone watching could see them. His phone, the secondary one, a clean burner registered to Cross, buzzed once in his jacket pocket. He didn't reach for it yet. He waited until he found a support column near the far end of the arrivals corridor and stepped into its shadow before he pressed the earpiece into place and opened the encrypted channel. Chloe's voice came through immediately, clipped and precise, with that particular edge she always had when the situation was already worse than the briefing suggested. "You're on the ground," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just cleared the gate. Talk to me." "The threat is credible, Jack. We've had 3 independent confirmations in the last 6 hours. A weaponized pathogen. We're calling it Variant 7 for now, because no one at Langley wants to give it a real name yet. Aerosolized delivery. The working theory is a dispersal device hidden somewhere inside the summit venue, or close enough to it that the distinction doesn't matter." He let that land. The G7 summit was 41 hours away. Heads of state from 7 of the world's largest economies, their senior staff, their security details, plus the press corps and the diplomatic overflow, a crowd large enough that a single, well-placed aerosol device could turn a political gathering into a mass casualty event inside of minutes. "Source?" he asked. "A network we've been running inside a logistics company out of Osaka. One of their people got cold feet and reached out through a cutout. The information checks out against satellite imagery and 2 signals intercepts we've been sitting on since Tuesday. Whoever is behind this has been moving components into the city for at least 2 weeks. Who's my contact on the ground?" There was a half-second pause that told him something was already wrong. With Chloe, half a second was a long time. "Her name is Yuki Tanaka. She's been embedded here for 8 months. You're looking for a woman, mid-30s, dark coat. She'll have a red lanyard from the summit media pool. She knows your cover. She's supposed to meet you at the international arrivals exit, ground level, south end." Supposed to. She missed her last 2 check-ins. The first one I wrote off. The second one was 40 minutes ago. "Jack, I need you to find her before you do anything else." He pulled the earpiece out, pocketed it, and moved. The international arrivals hall opened up around him like a stage set. High ceilings, polished floors, the smell of recycled air and distant coffee. Families waiting behind a low barrier, drivers holding tablets with names on them, a few tourists photographing the departure boards out of habit. Jack scanned left, scanned right. He was looking for a woman in a dark coat with a red lanyard and the particular kind of stillness that field operatives carry when they're trying not to be noticed. He didn't find her. What he found instead was a cluster of people near the south end of the hall, maybe 8 or 9 of them, standing in a loose half-circle around something on the floor. 2 airport security officers were pushing through from the outside, radios crackling. A third was on his phone, speaking fast in Japanese, one hand pressed to the side of his face like he was trying to block out the noise of the world. Jack walked toward them at a measured pace. He got close enough to see past the edge of the crowd. She was on the floor, beside a row of fixed seats, one arm folded beneath her, the other stretched out, as though she had reached for something and not quite made it. Dark coat, red lanyard, a face that had been young not long ago, and now held the absolute stillness of someone who had gone somewhere no one could follow. Yuki Tanaka. He didn't stop walking. He kept moving, past the edge of the crowd, past the security officers, through the automatic doors, and out into the humid Tokyo night. He needed 30 seconds. He gave himself 20. There was no visible wound, no blood on the floor that he'd seen. Whatever had killed her had been fast and clean and professional, and it had happened in a busy international terminal at midnight, which meant whoever had done it either didn't care about witnesses or had arranged things so that witnesses would see nothing worth remembering. Either possibility was bad. The combination of both was worse. He stopped near a concrete pillar at the edge of the taxi queue and pressed the earpiece back in. "Chloe, I'm here. She's dead. Ground level, south arrivals. Whoever made her knew enough to do it quietly and leave before the body was found. My cover may already be burned. If they were watching her, they were watching for her contact." The silence on the other end lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Are you compromised?" "I don't know yet." He looked out at the city, the elevated expressways, the blinking towers, the vast and indifferent sprawl of Tokyo pressing outward in every direction under a low orange sky. 41 hours, a dead operative behind him, a pathogen somewhere in that city, and a clock that had already started without him. "Then move," Chloe said, "because whoever killed her just bought themselves a head start, and you're the only thing between them and 40 million people." He was already walking, and the city came at him all at once. Narita's terminal doors opened onto a wall of humid air and the low roar of 1,000 separate lives moving at speed. Jack Bauwer pulled his jacket across the shoulder holster he wasn't supposed to have cleared customs with, a favor from a man at Langley who owed him 3 of them, and kept his eyes moving. Every face, every hand, every angle of departure. Old habit, the kind that kept you breathing. His earpiece crackled. "Jack, I've got your NPA contact pulling up curbside in about 90 seconds. Chloe's voice was flat and efficient, the way it got when she was running 4 things at once. "Her name is Keiko Tanaka. She's been briefed on the broad strokes, not the pathogen specifically. Tokyo Station wanted it compartmentalized until you made contact. What do I actually know about her? 12 years with the National Police Agency, Counter-Terrorism Division for the last 4. She's cleared her own people twice for internal leaks, which either means she's exceptionally good or exceptionally careful." "Probably both. She asked for you by name, Jack. She specifically requested the CTU officer who worked the Drazen operation." That gave him something to think about. He stepped through the sliding doors into the drop-off lane and found her immediately, because she was the only person standing completely still in a corridor of motion. Early 40s, dark suit, hair pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested discipline rather than vanity. She was reading him the same way he was reading her, and she didn't pretend otherwise. "Bauer-san." Her English was clean, almost accent-free. She didn't extend her hand. She was already turning toward the car. "We drive and talk. There is no time for the other kind." He got in. The city swallowed them inside of 10 minutes, the expressway feeding into a cascade of surface streets that Jack could not have navigated alone in a decade. Kayako drove with both hands and her eyes on 3 mirrors at once. She told him what she knew in the clipped, sequential way of someone who had learned to brief under pressure. A customs flag 2 days ago, a biological containment case, diplomatic pouch exemption, origin listed as a research facility in Hokkaido that had been quietly decommissioned 18 months prior. The case had moved through channels that should not have existed, cleared by signatures that would later prove to be forgeries, and then it had simply gone quiet. Until 40 minutes ago, when a camera at Shinjuku station had flagged a face. A courier known to NPA as a low-level logistics runner named Daisuke Mori. Mori is not ideological, Keiko said. She took an exit ramp without signaling and merged into a river of taxis without hesitation. He moves things for money. He has moved things for 3 different organizations in 5 years. He is a professional neutral. So whoever has the pathogen hired a contractor. Jack was already running the geometry. That's clean. It puts distance between the package and the principal. Yes. Except, she paused, and the pause carried weight. Our analyst at Shinjuku station did not just flag his face. She flagged his posture, his gait pattern. There is a recognition algorithm we use for stress indicators in crowded environments. Daisuke Mori was not walking like a man being paid. He was walking like a man being forced. Jack looked at her. Dead man trigger. We believe so. A device of some kind, wired to his person. If his biometrics drop below threshold, cardiac arrest, loss of consciousness, or deliberate termination, the case releases. We do not yet know the dispersal mechanism. She said it the way doctors say terminal, precise, without apology. 40 million people. Jack thought it and didn't say it because saying it out loud wouldn't make it smaller. Shinjuku arrived like a detonation. There was no other word for it. The expressway curved and suddenly the towers were everywhere, their faces sheeted in advertisements 3 stories tall, the streets below them packed with bodies moving in every direction under neon that turned the night into something close to daylight. It was beautiful, and it was overwhelming, and it was exactly the kind of environment that made a needle in a haystack look like a straightforward problem. Keiko pulled to the curb and killed the engine. My team has 2 plainclothes officers inside the east exit concourse. They are maintaining visual on Mori. He has not moved toward any platform. He appears to be waiting. For a handoff? Yes, which means whoever is receiving the package will be here soon, and when that handoff happens, the trigger becomes their problem. Jack was already out of the car, or they deactivate it. Either way, we lose the window. He pressed his earpiece. Chloe, you with me? Always. I've got the station camera feeds routed through the satellite uplink. I can see your position. I'm also running a search on the organization name you pulled from the dead operative's phone. Kuroi Taiyo. Black Sun. What do you have? Not enough. That's the problem. He could hear her typing, fast and relentless. It's not in any of our existing databases as a formal organization, but I'm finding references, financial transfers, 3 of them in the last 8 months. 2 of them trace back to accounts connected to Japanese Diet members. One of them... She stopped. Chloe. One of them traces to an account that was used to fund a security contract for the American consulate in Osaka. Jack, this isn't a fringe group. These people have access. He absorbed that and kept moving because the alternative was standing still, and standing still was not something the clock permitted. He crossed into the station concourse with Keiko 1 step behind him, and the crowd folded around them, oblivious and enormous and alive. Somewhere in this press of bodies, a man named Daisuke Mori was waiting with a dead man trigger strapped to his chest, carrying something that could hollow out a city block, or worse, and the people walking past him were thinking about dinner trains and missed connections, and nothing at all about the particular weight of the world that had arrived in their midst. Jack spotted Mori in 40 seconds. He was standing near a pillar by the east exit, a hard-sided case at his feet, his face composed into the blankness of someone working very hard not to look afraid. He was maybe 35, slight build. His hands were at his sides and they were not moving, and Jack could see, even from this distance, the faint outline of something beneath his jacket on the left side. Keiko touched Jack's arm. Her voice was barely above the ambient noise. "My officers can hold position, but if we move on him directly and the trigger is pressure sensitive..." "I know." Jack exhaled slowly. "I'm going to talk to him. That is not protocol." "No," he said. "It's not." He straightened his jacket and walked toward the pillar, alone, through the indifferent crowd, the way he had walked toward 100 bad situations before this one. The difference was that this time, if he read it wrong, the mistake wouldn't be his to carry. It would belong to everyone around him, none of whom had any idea they were already inside the radius of something terrible, waiting for a single wrong move to make it real. He had read it right this time. The contact at the pillar had handed him nothing but a burner phone and a 4-digit code, and by the time Jack had memorized both and turned back, the man was already gone, absorbed into the station crowd like a stone dropped into deep water. The phone buzzed once in his palm. One message, 8 characters, a grid reference and a timestamp that was already 11 minutes old. He moved. The grid reference put him in Akihabara, 2 kilometers east, in the narrow service corridor between a component warehouse and a pachinko hall that had been closed since the previous spring. Jack had been to Akihabara once before, years ago, in a different life, when the city had meant something other than operational geometry. He remembered the light most of all, the way the storefronts stacked neon 6 floors high and threw it down onto the street in colors that had no names in any language he spoke. Tonight that light would be cover. He would take it. He was still 3 blocks from the station entrance when his earpiece clicked twice. That was Keiko's signal for compromise. He stopped walking. A taxi idled at the curb beside him, and he got in without being asked, gave the driver an address 2 blocks short of where he needed to be, and pressed himself into the corner of the back seat. Someone burned me. It wasn't a question. He had felt it coming for the last hour, the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before the storm arrives. Not knowledge exactly, more like a weight settling across the shoulders. He pulled the earpiece free and switched frequencies, the way Chappelle had taught him in a basement in Virginia a long time ago, before Chappelle was gone and the lessons were all that remained. Kiko's voice came through on the secondary channel, lower than usual, tighter. She said 3 words. "Hayashi knows you." Then she said a name he didn't recognize, and then she said a rank, and the rank was senior enough that his stomach moved in a way it hadn't moved in years. A deputy director of the National Police Agency, a man who had been inside the intelligence loop for over a year, a man who had been in the room for every operational briefing since Kuroyo Taiyo had first surfaced as a credible threat. Jack said nothing for a moment. The taxi moved through traffic, indifferent and warm. He told her to document everything she had and to send it to a secondary address he gave her from memory. He told her not to use the NPA network for anything, not a single query, not a timestamp, nothing. He told her to trust no one in her building. She said she understood. He believed her. The broker's name was Doi. That was all anyone called him. He operated out of 3 rotating locations in Akihabara, and the grid reference on the burner phone pointed to the second of those 3, a service-level room above a shop that sold surplus circuit boards and obsolete military-grade connectors to people who knew what they were looking for. The room had 1 entrance and no windows. Jack knew before he arrived that Doi would already be frightened. Men in Doi's position were always frightened. They lived inside information the way other people lived inside debt, constantly aware of its weight, constantly calculating what it would cost them when it came due. He found the entrance behind a rusted ventilation stack and went up the stairs without announcing himself. The door at the top was unlocked. That was either carelessness or an invitation, and Jack had long ago stopped assuming carelessness. Doi was a small man, mid-50s, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting in a bad room for a long time. He was seated at a workbench covered in disassembled hardware, and he did not reach for anything when Jack came through the door, which Jack noted and appreciated. There was a laptop open beside him. The screen was dark. Jack sat down across from him and said, in the plainest Japanese he could manage, that he needed the synthesis code, that he needed it now, and that whatever Doi had been paid to keep it quiet was no longer a number that applied to the current situation. Doi looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the door behind Jack, and Jack turned his head just enough to confirm no one was there, and when he turned back, Doi was already talking. The code had been broken into 3 segments and distributed across separate carriers, he said. He held one segment. The other 2 were with people he trusted, which he admitted was a relative term. Jack told him that 2 out of 3 was not a synthesis code, it was a fragment. Doi said he knew that. He said he had been trying to reach the other 2 carriers for 6 hours and neither had responded. His voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when steadiness is the only thing left to hold on to. That meant Kuroi Taiyo already knew about the segmentation. That meant the mole had given them not just Jack's position, but the structure of the broker network. Someone had been very thorough. Someone had been inside this operation longer than the operation had existed in its current form. Jack looked at the laptop. He asked Doi to open it. Doi hesitated, then reached over and touched the trackpad, and the screen came alive with a directory that Jack scanned in 3 seconds flat. 1 segment. Encrypted but present. A starting point. It was less than he needed and more than he'd had 60 seconds ago. He pulled a drive from his jacket and told Doi to copy it. While Doi worked, Jack stood at the door and listened to the building around them, the hum of ventilation, the distant machine clatter of the pachinko hall, the street noise rising from below in waves. Nothing wrong in any of it. Which meant either they were safe or the threat was already too close to make noise. Doi handed him the drive. Jack pocketed it and told Doi to leave the city. Tonight, not tomorrow. Doi nodded once, slowly, with the expression of a man who had known this moment was coming and had simply been waiting to find out what shape it would take when it arrived. Outside, the Akihabara light fell across the street in its nameless colors, and Jack walked into it with the drive in his pocket and Keiko's intelligence burning in the back of his mind like a coal. The deputy director, the year of leaks, the shape of a betrayal so patient and so deep that it had become part of the architecture of the investigation itself. He did not run. Running drew eyes. He walked and he thought, and somewhere behind him, in a city of 14 million people, a senior official with a clean record and a long career was reaching for a phone to find out whether the problem in Akihabara had been solved. It hadn't. But the problem knew his name now. And that changed everything. The problem knew his name now, and that changed everything. But knowing a name and stopping a weapon are 2 entirely different things, and Jack Calloway had roughly 4 hours left to learn the difference. The arrest of Deputy Director Sato had taken 11 minutes from the moment Jack placed the call to Keiko's contact inside the National Police Agency. 11 minutes of bureaucratic disbelief, then confirmation, then the quiet violence of handcuffs in a government corridor. Jack hadn't been there to see it. He'd been moving already because Sato was never the end point. Sato was the door, and behind the door was a room full of drones. Keiko had the schematics spread across the hood of a borrowed car on a side street off Omotesando, her tablet casting blue light across her face in the grey afternoon. The data recovered from Sato's encrypted partition had taken her 20 minutes to break open. What was inside had taken her breath away. 41 drones. Distributed across 17 rooftop positions in a rough arc centered on Shibuya Crossing. Each unit modified to carry a pressurized aerosol canister, small enough to pass for commercial delivery hardware, lethal enough to seed a crowd of 40,000 people with a synthetic respiratory pathogen designed to incubate silently for 72 hours before presenting symptoms. By the time anyone understood what had happened, the summit delegates would be dispersed across a dozen countries. The vector would be untraceable. The attribution would be impossible. That was the point. Release window is tied to the ceremony start, Keiko said, not looking up. The drones are on a synchronized timer. They don't need a human trigger. They don't need a signal. They just need the clock to run out. She tapped the screen. 2 hours and 58 minutes. Jack studied the arc of positions. 7 of the 17 sites were within a 15-minute radius of where they stood. The other 10 were scattered. Daikanyama, Nakameguro, a cluster near Harajuku. He did the math quietly, and the math was not kind. "We can't hit all of them," he said. "No," she agreed. "But we don't have to." She pointed to 3 nodes near the center of the arc. These 3 positions are the network hubs. The other 14 units sync to them for timing calibration. If we disable the hubs, the peripheral drones default to a dormant failsafe state. It's how the operator ensures they don't fire early. She paused. It's also the only design flaw we have. Jack was already pulling on his jacket. Addresses. She gave them. He memorized them. It was what he did. The first hub was a parking structure on the edge of Shibuya. 7 stories of concrete and exhaust fumes, with a rooftop access door held shut by a padlock that took Jack 40 seconds to defeat. The drone was there, matte black, folded, sitting in a weatherproof case like something ordered from a catalogue. He disabled it the way Keiko had shown him. A physical interrupt to the timing circuit, simple and irreversible. He was back on the street in under 4 minutes. 1 down. The second hub was harder. A narrow building near Miyashita Park, residential on the lower floors, a rooftop garden on top that someone was using as a staging area for more than succulents. Jack found 2 drones instead of 1 and spent 8 minutes he didn't have confirming both were part of the network before disabling them. He also found a man watching the door from a folding chair. The man reached for something at his belt. Jack reached faster. The man sat back down, less voluntarily than before, and Jack used the man's own zip ties to express his feelings about the situation. He was 3 blocks from the third hub when his phone buzzed, Keiko's name on the screen. He answered without breaking stride. Her voice was wrong. Controlled, but wrong. The particular flatness of someone speaking under observation. "Jack, change of plans. I need you to come to the Hikari building, 9th floor. Come alone." A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Please." He stopped walking. Around him, Shibuya churned and pulsed, the crossing below already drawing its afternoon crowds, the screens above it painting everything in moving color. He said, "Are you hurt?" "No." Another pause. "Just come." The line went dead. He went. The 9th floor of the Hikari building was a conference facility, largely empty in the gap between morning and evening bookings. Jack found the right room by following the open door and the silence behind it, which was the loudest kind. Keiko stood near the window, the city enormous and bright behind her. Standing beside her, one hand on her arm with the casual ease of someone who had done this before, was a man in his 60s, straight-backed, silver at the temples, eyes that had the practiced stillness of someone trained to wait. Colonel Hiroshi Maki. Jack had read his file on the train from Akihabara. JSDF, retired, decorated, grievances that were documented, real, and in his own telling, unanswered for 11 years. A man who had concluded that the language of institutions was a language designed to say no, and who had learned a different language in the years since. "Mr. Calloway," Mackie said, His English was precise and unhurried. "I want you to make a call to whoever is currently coordinating the response to my network. I want them to stand down, all teams, all positions. In exchange, Ms. Tanaka walks out of here, and I surrender myself to the proper authorities." He said the last phrase without irony, which was somehow worse. "The pathogen is not released. The drones are recovered. Everyone goes home." Jack looked at Keiko. She was watching him with the calm of someone who had already done their own math and arrived at a number they didn't like. "You'd trust that call?" Jack said. "I'd trust the consequences of not making it," Maki replied. "The third hub activates in 41 minutes. Without the calibration sync, 7 peripheral units will misfire at random intervals. Unpredictable dispersal. Much worse than the planned release." He tilted his head slightly. "I am offering you a clean resolution. I suggest you take it." It was the kind of offer that was also a trap, and everyone in the room knew it. Jack set his phone on the table between them. He did not pick it up. He looked at Maki for a long moment, reading the architecture of the man the way he'd learned to read rooms. Entry points, load-bearing walls, the places where the structure was sound, and the places where it wasn't. Then he said, "Tell me about the third hub." And Maki's eyes shifted, just once, just slightly, to the window behind Keiko. That was enough. The window. Jack was already moving before the thought finished forming. He crossed the room in 3 steps, caught Keiko by the collar of her jacket and pulled her sideways and down, putting the concrete pillar between her and the glass. Maki didn't run. That was the thing about men like Maki. They never ran when they could command. He pressed a single key on the laptop in front of him, and somewhere below them, beneath the false floor of the waterfront warehouse that smelled of salt water and old hydraulic oil, something hummed to life. The broadcast went out at 18:04 hours. Jack watched it on the laptop screen while he kept one hand on Keiko's arm and the other on the cig at his hip. Maki's face filled the frame, composed, almost academic, the face of a man delivering a lecture rather than a threat. His voice was steady. His language was precise. He gave the governments of Japan and the United States exactly 2 hours to confirm the full and unconditional withdrawal of all American military installations from Japanese soil. He named the bases one by one. He cited the treaties by number. And then, with the quiet certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome, he described what the pathogen would do to an open-air crowd of 40,000 people gathered on the summit plaza. It was not a bluff. Jack had known that since Yokohama. The broadcast cut. Maki folded his hands. He looked at Jack the way a chess player looks at the board after sacrificing a queen, with patience, because the sacrifice was the point. "You have a choice," Maki said. "You can spend your remaining time trying to stop me, or you can spend it getting her out of the building." Jack said nothing. He looked at Keiko, who shook her head once, small and certain. He zip-tied Maki to the chair, took the laptop, and they went down. The stairwell beneath the warehouse floor was not on any blueprint CTU had pulled. It was raw concrete, single-bulb lighting, the kind of construction that predated permits and ignored inspectors. Jack went first, cig up, Keiko 2 steps behind with the compact Glock he'd taken off the man in the corridor above. The stairs turned twice and opened into a long passage that ran parallel to the waterfront, the ceiling low enough that Jack had to tilt his head on the left side where a conduit crossed the beam. The first room held 2 men. Jack took them before either had fully turned. Clean, fast, no shots fired. He dragged them behind a row of server racks that blinked green and amber in the dark. He keyed his radio. "Chloe, I'm in the substructure. I'm seeing a server array. Looks like 4 racks, heavy cabling running east toward the water. Is that your uplink node? Chloe's voice came back clipped and precise. That's one of them. There are 2 more. The primary is at the far end of the passage, closest to the bay. Jack, we have 91 minutes. I know. The second room was harder. 3 men, better positioned, and one of them had clearly been waiting, not reacting, waiting, which meant Mackie had comms they hadn't accounted for. Jack took a round across the outside of his left forearm, felt the burn and ignored it, put 2 shots center mass on the man who'd fired, and dropped behind a steel equipment cabinet while Keiko flanked left and put the third man down with a single shot that she fired without hesitation and without looking away. Jack pressed his back to the cabinet. He looked at her. She was breathing hard, but her hands were steady. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. "My father was GSDF," she said. He believed in preparedness. They moved. The passage opened into a larger space near the water. Jack could hear the bay now, the low mechanical slap of small waves against piling, could smell the brine coming through ventilation grates in the ceiling. The primary server node was here. It was also defended by 4 men in a tight formation around a central console, and the man at the console was actively typing, which meant the uplink was live and the clock was not theoretical anymore. Jack took a breath. He assessed the geometry of the room the way he'd assessed 10,000 rooms before it. Angles of fire, cover, the one support column near the east wall that would give him a step and a half of protection if he moved immediately and didn't stop moving. He didn't stop moving. What followed was close and brutal and very fast. Jack took the first man on the left with a strike to the throat before the man could raise his weapon, used the momentum to push through to the second, took a hit to the ribs that cracked something and kept going because stopping was not an option he was entertaining. Keiko drew fire from the right flank, giving Jack the half-second he needed. He reached the console man last, pulled him back from the keyboard by his collar, and put him on the floor. He stood over the console, bleeding from his arm, breathing through the pain in his ribs, and looked at the screen. The uplink status bar read, "Transmission ready, awaiting authorization." He keyed the radio. "Chloe, I'm at the primary node. Talk me through the severance protocol." "Jack, listen carefully." Her voice had that quality it got when the margin was genuinely thin. Not panic, never panic with Chloe, but a compression, a tightening of each word. "You cannot just cut the physical connection. The system is designed to auto-authorize if it detects a forced interruption. You need to enter a spoofed command that tells it the transmission has already completed successfully. I'm sending you a 12-character string right now. Type it exactly." The string appeared on his phone. He typed it with his right hand, his left arm pressed against his side, the blood from the forearm wound making the phone slick. He typed it again when the system rejected the first attempt. On the third try, the status bar changed. "Transmission cancelled. Session closed." Jack leaned on the console for a moment. Just a moment. Then he straightened, looked at Keiko across the room, and nodded once. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. "Chloe," he said, "the primary node is down. What's the status on the secondary hubs?" "Teams have them," she said. "Both neutralized in the last 4 minutes. Jack, the summit is secure. The deadline passes in 38 minutes, and there is nothing left to deliver." He looked around the room. The servers were dark now. The men on the floor were not moving. The bay sounds came through the vents, ordinary and indifferent, the water doing what water does regardless of what happens in the rooms beside it. He picked up Mackie's laptop from where he'd set it against the wall and tucked it under his arm. Evidence. Always the evidence. "Get me extraction at the south waterfront access," he said. and get someone down here for medical. Nothing critical. He paused. Probably. He warped back toward the stairs. Keiko fell in beside him, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say that the silence didn't already contain. The stairs took him up through 3 floors of recycled air and flickering fluorescence, and by the time he pushed through the rooftop access door, the sky over Tokyo Bay had begun to do something he hadn't expected. It had begun to turn beautiful. The first pale line of dawn sat low on the eastern horizon, the color of embers before they die, spreading across the water in long, slow strokes. The rainbow bridge rose ahead of him, its cables catching the earliest light, and Jack moved toward it at a pace that wasn't quite a run. Not yet. He had 4 minutes, maybe less. The relay unit was the last one. Chloe had confirmed it 11 minutes ago, her voice clipped and precise the way it got when she was running out of options and didn't want him to know. 3 of the 5 nodes had already been dark. 2 were burning. This one was live, mounted somewhere on the bridge's southern pedestrian walkway, broadcasting a continuous handshake signal to the swarm. 41 drones, each one carrying a payload that didn't need to be large to be catastrophic in a room full of heads of state. The math was simple, and it was ugly. He crossed the access road at a low run, the hard drive tucked against his ribs, and he heard footsteps above him before he saw the figure. Maki was standing at the walkway railing, facing the bay. She didn't turn when he came through the gate. She already knew he was there. She had probably known for the last 3 minutes, had probably positioned herself exactly here, exactly like this, because Maki Ishida did not do anything without intention. That had been true when she was running counterintelligence for the agency. It was still true now. You found all of them, she said. Not a question. 4 out of 5. He moved along the walkway, keeping distance between them, eyes scanning the cable housings until he found it. Grey box, magnetic mount, just below the second lighting cluster. 60 feet away. Step back from the railing, Maki. She almost smiled. He could see the edge of it in profile. You know what's interesting about you, Jack? She said, and her voice was steady, almost conversational, the bay wind pulling at her coat. You always arrive exactly in time to stop things, never early enough to prevent them from beginning. He was moving toward the relay while she talked. He'd done this long enough to know that when someone wanted to have a conversation during the final seconds of an operation, they were either stalling or saying goodbye. With Maki, he suspected both. The summit goes forward, he said. Whatever you built here, it ends today. The summit. She said it like she was turning a stone over in her hand. You think this was about the summit? He reached the relay. His fingers found the panel seam, and he worked it fast, the way Chloe had walked him through it twice on the drive over. 2 contacts, 1 capacitor. He'd need to short them simultaneously, or the failsafe would trip the broadcast signal and do the job anyway. It was never only about the summit, Maki said. She turned then, and for the first time he could see her face clearly in the growing light. She looked tired, not defeated, just tired, the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time. You'll understand that, eventually. The contacts connected. The relay's indicator light went dark. 41 drones fell out of the air over Tokyo Bay in the same moment, their guidance signals cut, their payloads inert, splashing down into water that was just beginning to catch the color of the sunrise. Somewhere across the city, in a conference hall surrounded by security details that had no idea how close the morning had come to being something else entirely, the summit would be starting its first session right about now. Coffee poured, handshakes exchanged, history being made in the careful, deliberate way that history usually got made, with no knowledge of the other kind of history that had almost been written instead. Jack kept his eyes on Maki. She had reached into her coat, and for a half-second, every trained instinct he had snapped to attention. But what she produced was not a weapon. It was a phone. She set it on the railing between them, screen up, and stepped back 2 paces. "For Chloe," she said. "She'll know what to do with it." He looked at the phone. He looked at her. "You're not running," he said. "I told you." Her voice was quiet now, almost swallowed by the wind off the water. "You always arrive in time to stop things. I've been stopped." She held his gaze. "The people who built what I built, Jack, they're still building. That's what I'm giving you, not a confession, a map." The sound of rotors came from the south, not drones this time. A helicopter, bearing the markings of the Metropolitan Police, cutting low across the bay. Behind it, on the access road, he could already see the first vehicles. Maki watched them come. She didn't move. She had made her calculation and she was standing in it, the way she always stood in her decisions, completely and without apology. Jack picked up the phone. He held it for a moment, thinking about everything it might contain, everything it probably did contain, and then he tucked it into his jacket alongside the hard drive. He didn't say anything else to her. There was nothing to say that the morning didn't already contain, the same way the silence on the stairs had held everything that needed holding between him and Keiko. Some endings didn't require words, they just required witness. He moved to the far side of the walkway. There was a maintenance ladder, north face, and he was down it before the first police unit reached the bridge access. By the time the officers found Maki standing alone at the railing, hands already raised, the walkway behind her was empty. He was 3 blocks away, moving through streets that were just beginning to fill with the ordinary sounds of a city waking up, when he stopped in a doorway and opened his encrypted channel to Chloe. He didn't speak. He typed. 7 words, and then the file transfer of everything on the phone Maki had left him. The 7 words were, "It's not over. Start from the beginning." He closed the channel, straightened his jacket, and walked out into the Tokyo morning, where the light was coming up golden clean over the bay, and the city had no idea what it had almost lost, and the day was already moving on without him, the way days always did, the way he had always preferred them to.